I am here to talk a little bit about resiliency and sustainability for businesses, and a lot of folks have touched on that already. And we talk about it not just in terms of disasters, but also in terms of technology invasions, all sorts of other kinds of things. Because what we know from experience is that it doesn't take an earthquake necessarily to destroy a business. It can take an illness. It can take almost anything. And so what we try to do with our members, who are predominantly small businesses, is to work with them and help them understand the challenges they may be facing, but also what they can do to protect themselves. The Chamber, we're a massive organization of 5 people. And we're basically technology driven, like so many businesses. We have not one but 2 resiliency initiatives or resiliency programs for our technology. One of them's local. We have everything gets backed up to a hard drive every night on all of our computers, and the other one is on the other side of the country, which does the same thing. You know, in the event of a disaster for us, for us to keep going, we need to be able to 2 things. We need to be able to communicate with the members, but also know who they are and what they're doing, and what they need. I would, interestingly enough, yesterday when I was driving home, on NPR, they were interviewing a restaurant owner in Maryland. Did you all see the news last night where the main street in the town of Maryland was flooded? That's, as I said, it's a 1,000-year storm. It's the second one they've had in 3 years. And they interviewed the small business owner, the restaurateur, who had been wiped out the first time, took 18 months to rebuild, was able to run for 6 months before he got wiped out yesterday, or the day before. The interesting thing, and what I always say about small business people, is by nature they're resilient, they're tough. They're in business to be in business and stay in business, and it takes a whole lot to discourage them. Doesn't necessarily take a whole lot to put them out of business, but it takes a whole lot to discourage them. They want to come back and get back in business, but if they're facing hundreds of thousands of dollars of costs that they can't recoup, there's no telling whether they'll actually get back in business. The restaurant guy, when they asked him, they asked him if he was going to rebuild again, and he said, "I'm thinking about it, but probably." That's the nature of small business folks. In Pasadena, we're not quite as progressive as Santa Monica on earthquake and resiliency, but we're close. And in fact, the other day, Pasadena released the results of a survey on soft-story buildings, and identified the locations where the soft-story buildings are. We have less than 300. Which is good, but we have a little less than 300, which need some form of attention to make sure they don't end up like the building in the slide. We've been fairly lucky in Pasadena. I tell everybody, my wife and I came here in 1982. We never felt an earthquake until after we bought our house in 1986. Within 3 months, there was an earthquake out in Palm Springs that woke us up in the middle of the night. And then within, 8 years, we had the Whittier quake, Sierra Madre quake, a quake under the Rose Bowl, and Northridge. And we kept thinking maybe somebody's trying to tell us something. But we were actually very lucky in our house. Our house is 105 years old. Makes a lot of noise in an earthquake, but doesn't fall down. Pasadena, after I think it was the Whittier quake, or it may have been Santa Monica, it's not Santa Monica, Sierra Madre, passed an ordinance requiring that unreinforced masonry buildings be retrofit. I served on council starting in '95, and about '98, one of my constituent businesses, which was in a very old unreinforced masonry building, called complaining about the city was going to make him do this reinforcement. It was going to cost too much money. And sympathetic. It's going to cost you a lot of money. But what happens if you're in the building and there's an earthquake and it falls down around your ears? The resiliency, the reinforcement, the taking time to and care and spending money in advance is a good investment, as people have said. It can sometimes be difficult to get a small business owner to understand that. We bought our building a couple of years ago. It's essentially a unreinforced masonry building. It had been retrofit. We reinforced the retrofit. What our building was required to do, it's a small 1,400 square foot building, was better tie the roof and the ceiling to the walls. So we added a few I don't know what they're called actually now in construction, but in steelwork it was angle bars to do that. Cost probably a tenth of what it cost us to comply with Title 21. Because. But we thought if we're doing all that work, we might as well spend a little bit extra money and be that much safer. We work a lot with our businesses and our members on things like that. It doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive to be safe. It doesn't have to be prohibitively expensive to ensure that if there's an earthquake or anything, for you to stay in business. And keep paying, keep your employees employed, and all of those kind of things that are so important in an economy. When I was on the city council, you saw that nice picture of the San Francisco City Hall. I don't have a slide, so what I'm going to suggest is you go to Pasadena and look at our city hall, and bring your credit card and spend a little money while you're there. Chamber of Commerce, Pasadena City Hall looked kind of like that. It's a domed building. The dome is about 6 stories tall. When I was on the council, we approved $110 million to retrofit the building, but also do all of the systems inside and restore the building. About 25% of that was putting the building on shock absorbers. But when we looked at it, it was a lot of money, and there were some people who thought, sell the building to a hotel, let them do it, move City Hall somewhere else. But when asked, the citizens of Pasadena said, you can't give up that building. It's the Rose Bowl, City Hall, and the Colorado Street Bridge are iconic architecture in Pasadena. And it was well worth it. It was an interesting project to see. Shock absorbers are the size of the table, and about that tall. But again, a good investment. It's much cheaper to do that than to try to rebuild that building or even build a new city hall at this point. As I said, Pasadena's gone through and inventoried the soft story buildings. The next step, I'm sure, is to require that those get retrofit. If you're looking at it, it's as a property owner in one of those buildings, it's a good investment. I have friends in Studio City and friends in Santa Monica who all had damage from the Northridge earthquake. One of my wife's colleagues was out of her condo for 2.5 years. That not only was it an expense in rebuilding the building and the insurance and her portion of all of that, but she had to live somewhere else for 2.5 years. It is not an inexpensive proposition to deal even with minor damage. On the Sierra Madre quake, I live in an old bungalow, in a neighborhood of old bungalows, and the house across the street had a really beautiful Arroyo stone chimney. The people who lived in the house parked their car beside the chimney. After the Sierra Madre quake, they lost the chimney and the car. Luckily no one was hurt, and the worst damage that we all had, we didn't have any, but that people had was chimneys. So we were all kind of lucky. But you got to look at all of those costs, everything, and what it costs the community. And what it will take to rebuild if you don't do something. The Pasadena Chamber has been supportive of all of the legislation now that's going to require inventorying soft-story buildings. We were not particularly in favor of it, but when the state now is including funding along with that, makes it a very easy decision. Even though it's done in Pasadena, it needs to be done everywhere. I don't know if you ever get a chance. I think it's on the USGS site, Geological Survey. There's a simulation of what a major earthquake will do in Southern California and how fast it can get here and where the more significant damage will be. After you've had lunch in Pasadena and seen our City Hall, you can go to the library and look that up. But it's frightening when you look at it. We potentially could have sort of massive devastation here. So it certainly makes sense to our mind as a chamber in Pasadena to support our members in their own resiliency plans, provide them information, get them expert advice, but also to be to be conscious of the fact that we all need to really be concerned about the safety of our family, the safety of our neighbors, and the people that we work with. So anyway, that's it. I'll be real quick, try to get us back on time. So thank you all.